Hey everyone, before we dive in, I want to ask, where are you watching from today? Maybe from New York, or Chicago, or a quiet little town in the Midwest? I'd love to know in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories that touch the soul. Your support really means the world. Now, let me tell you something that happened to me not too long ago. Something that caught me completely off guard, and yet changed me in ways I never expected. It was one of those crisp autumn days at the university, when the leaves outside were painting the campus in shades of orange and gold. The kind of day that makes you pause for a moment and just breathe in the quiet beauty around you. I was walking down one of the longer hallways that connected the older buildings on campus, my bag slung over one shoulder, a cup of lukewarm coffee in my hand. The hallway was mostly empty, except for a few students scattered along its length, some with earbuds in, some huddled in small clusters talking in hushed tones. I had come to the university that morning for a guest lecture. Not as a student, but as a parent, there to see the environment my son had been immersed in for the past year. He'd been insistent that I visit more often, though I wasn't sure if it was out of pride, a sense of duty, or perhaps a little bit of curiosity. I think now it was all of the above. I had just paused near a window, watching the way the sunlight glimmered through the autumn leaves, when I saw him. He wasn't far down the hall, but there was something in the way he was walking, slightly hesitant, a little fidgety, that made me stop and really notice him. I could feel my heart tighten in that peculiar, bittersweet way a mother's heart does when she realizes her child is growing up faster than she expected. "Mom?" he called softly, as though testing whether it was really me. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, smiling warmly as I stepped closer. He was taller now, more confident in his posture than the shy boy I remembered from high school, but there was still a trace of vulnerability in his eyes that made my chest ache in the best possible way. We stood there for a moment, the murmur of distant footsteps echoing around us, and I felt an unexpected tightness in my throat. I wanted to say everything at once. How proud I was, how much I missed him, how much I loved seeing the man he was becoming. But I held back, sensing that he had something on his mind, something that weighed on him more than he wanted to admit aloud. He shifted slightly, running a hand through his hair, that nervous motion that somehow made him look both adult and still my little boy. I need to tell you something," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow cutting through the ambient noise of the hallway. My heart skipped. I nodded, giving him the space to continue. "You can tell me anything," I said, my voice steady even as my thoughts raced. He took a deep breath and looked me squarely in the eye. "It's about something I've been struggling with, and I didn't know how to say it before." There was a pause, long enough that I thought he might turn away, but he didn't. He held my gaze, as though he were summoning every ounce of courage he had. I noticed the faint tremor in his hands, the subtle shift of his weight from one foot to the other, the tiny crease in his brow. These were all little details I hadn't seen in him since he was a boy afraid of the dark. And now, here he was, standing before me, a young adult on the verge of sharing something deeply personal, trusting me to understand without judgment. "Mom," he said again, quieter this time, almost reverently, "I've been trying to figure out who I really am. And part of that is about me being honest with myself. And with you." My chest tightened in a way that was both frightening and beautiful. There was so much I wanted to say, but instead I just nodded, letting him feel that he had my full attention, that whatever he was about to say, it would not change the love I felt for him. He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding the air in his lungs for far too long, and began to speak. The words came out haltingly at first, but soon they flowed with a rhythm that was both vulnerable and courageous. I could see the weight lifting from his shoulders as he spoke, and I felt a strange mix of awe and pride swelling in me. Around us, the hallway seemed to fade into the background. The distant voices, the echo of footsteps, even the sunlight spilling across the tile. All of it became secondary to the quiet, fragile moment between us. I found myself reaching out, gently placing a hand on his arm, an anchor in the storm of emotions swirling around us. He stopped talking for a moment, looking down, then back up at me. His eyes were glistening slightly, but not with sadness, more like relief and perhaps a little fear of how I would react. I took both his hands in mine and smiled softly. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "I can't tell you how proud I am that you trusted me with this." He exhaled again, a small laugh escaping him, nervous but genuine. "I was worried. I didn't know if you'd understand." "I do," I said firmly. "And even if I didn't, it wouldn't change the fact that I love you. You being honest with yourself and with me is the bravest thing you can do." We stood there for a long moment, hands clasped, letting the intensity of the conversation settle between us. It wasn't dramatic, and there were no grand gestures, just the quiet understanding that we had crossed a threshold together, stepping into a deeper connection. Finally, he released my hands, and we began walking slowly down the hallway, side by side. The conversation shifted naturally to lighter topics, classes, professors, upcoming assignments, but beneath it all was a new current of trust, a subtle acknowledgement that something fundamental had changed between us. As we walked, I realized that these small, unexpected moments, these shared vulnerabilities, were what made life rich and meaningful. I had spent years guiding, nurturing, and supporting him, but in this single, delicate conversation, he had taught me something too, about courage, honesty, and the quiet power of emotional connection. By the time we reached the next building, the sunlight had softened into a golden afternoon glow. He paused at the doorway, turned, and smiled at me. A full, unguarded smile that made me feel like everything in the world was exactly as it should be. "I'm glad you're here," he said simply. "And I'm glad you told me," I replied, feeling the warmth of pride and love settle deep into my chest. I didn't know then how much this moment would resonate in the days, months, and years to come, but I knew one thing with certainty. We had crossed a threshold together, and our bond had grown stronger, not just because of the words shared, but because of the trust, respect, and understanding that underpinned them. The university hallway, with its quiet echo and sun-dappled floors, had become the setting for something far greater than any lecture or classroom could offer, a real, lasting connection between mother and son, forged in honesty and mutual respect. And as I walked away later that afternoon, leaving him to head back to his next class, I carried with me the profound sense that life's most unexpected and deeply emotional experiences often arrive when we simply open our hearts and listen. After that day in the hallway, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. The moment had been brief, just a few minutes, but it lingered in my mind like the last notes of a favorite song. I found myself replaying his words, the way he had looked at me, the slight quiver in his voice, and I realized that in all my years as a parent, I had never felt quite so close to him. It was as if a door had opened between us that had been quietly waiting for the right time, and now that it had, there was no going back. A few days later, I returned to the campus, this time for a parent-student workshop. I had been hesitant at first, partly because I didn't want to intrude, partly because I was still adjusting to this new phase of our relationship. But I reminded myself that being present was important. I wanted to be part of his life in a way that was supportive but not overbearing. As I walked through the familiar hallways, the same ones where we had shared that conversation, I noticed the little details I had overlooked before. The walls, a pale beige, seemed warmer in the morning light. The wooden doors, some with scratches and scuffs, bore witness to countless students passing through. I paused by a window overlooking the quad, watching students gather on benches, their laughter carrying faintly on the crisp breeze. For a moment I felt the weight of time, how quickly it passes, how children grow into people you almost don't recognize, yet somehow always do. He found me before I could even reach the workshop room, slipping quietly up behind me and touching my shoulder. "Mom," he said, and just like before, that single word brought a warmth to my chest I hadn't anticipated. I turned, smiling. "Hey, you." There was a pause, the kind that feels full of unspoken thoughts. "Do you have time to walk with me for a bit? I want to show you something." His tone was casual, but I sensed an underlying nervousness, the same nervousness I had seen in the hallway that first day. "Of course," I said, and so we began walking together, down hallways that had once felt just functional, now transformed into spaces of memory and connection. He led me past classrooms, past rows of lockers, and finally down a staircase that opened onto a quiet courtyard. Sunlight spilled across the stone benches, highlighting the golden leaves scattered across the ground. He stopped in the middle of the courtyard and turned to face me. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about what I told you," he said, "and I realized that it's not just about admitting things to you. It's about admitting them to myself, about understanding who I am and who I want to be." I listened carefully, noticing the way his hands were tucked into his jacket pockets, the way his gaze wandered to the leaves for a moment before returning to me. There was a quiet intensity to him now, a seriousness that reminded me how much he had grown. "I've been afraid," he continued, "that people wouldn't understand, that even you might see me differently if I was completely honest about who I am." I felt my heart tighten. There was a delicate vulnerability in his words, but also a bravery that made me swell with pride. I reached out, gently resting a hand on his arm. "You know I will always love you," I said softly. "Nothing could ever change that. And the fact that you are brave enough to be honest, both with yourself and with me, that is something to be proud of." He exhaled, the tension in his shoulders slowly melting. I wasn't sure I'd ever feel ready to talk about it," he admitted. "But seeing you here, seeing you listen without judgment, it made me realize that I can face it." We stood together for a long while in that quiet courtyard. Around us, students passed by, some waving to friends, some lost in their own thoughts, but none of it seemed to matter. All that mattered was this space we had carved out for understanding, for honesty, for the quiet affirmation that comes when someone truly sees you. "Mom," he said finally, his voice steadier now, "I want to make changes in my life. Things I've been putting off, people I need to talk to. I want to start living in a way that's true to who I am." I smiled, feeling a warmth that spread through my entire being. "Then start," I said simply. "Small steps. You don't have to do everything at once. Just keep being honest with yourself, and the rest will follow." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. There was a glimmer of relief in his eyes, but also a spark of excitement, as though he had discovered a path he hadn't dared to walk before. "Thank you, Mom," he said, and it wasn't just polite gratitude. It was recognition, a shared understanding of the bond we had strengthened over the past few days. We continued walking together, heading back toward the workshop, but the mood had shifted. The campus, once just a backdrop to his studies, had become a place of reflection, of personal growth. Each step felt purposeful, each moment between us layered with meaning. That afternoon, sitting in the workshop, I'd watched him interact with other students, noticing how much more confident and grounded he seemed. And though the conversation we had in the hallway and courtyard had been private, its effects radiated outward. He moved differently, spoke differently, even smiled with a quiet assurance that was new to me. I realized that our relationship had entered a new phase. No longer was I just a parent guiding him from the sidelines. I was a witness to his growth, a companion in his journey, someone he trusted with the most vulnerable parts of himself. And in return, he was teaching me about resilience, about honesty, and about the subtle, profound ways love and respect can deepen over time. By the time we left the university, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the campus. We walked slowly to the car, talking about everything and nothing, savoring the calm of the late afternoon. And I carried with me a deep sense of gratitude for the trust he had placed in me, for the courage he had shown, and for the quiet, unexpected moments that remind you just how precious human connection can be. That day, I learned something vital: that growth, honesty, and mutual respect are not just abstract ideals, they are lived experiences, created in the small, intimate moments where hearts meet and understand one another without needing words to explain everything. The days after that afternoon on campus were quieter, yet somehow fuller. Life returned to its usual rhythm: work, errands, the hum of daily responsibilities. But there was an undercurrent of something new between us, a subtle awareness that had not been there before. Even small interactions carried a different weight now. A shared glance, a brief smile, or a simple "How was your day?" felt like a bridge connecting us, delicate yet enduring. One weekend, he invited me to join him for a study session at the campus library. I wasn't sure what to expect. I imagined a quiet room filled with students, the low hum of computers, and pages rustling. Yet what I found was a little more alive than I had anticipated. The library smelled faintly of old books and polished wood, a comforting scent that reminded me of my own college days, long ago. Sunlight streamed in through tall windows, casting geometric shadows across the tables, and the occasional murmur of conversation added to the serene atmosphere. He was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table with a stack of textbooks and a laptop open in front of him. He looked up and waved, his smile warm and inviting. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Glad you could make it." I smiled back, feeling a little flutter of nervousness mixed with anticipation. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied. He closed his laptop and gestured to the seat across from him. "I thought we could go over some research I've been doing. It's actually interesting," he added with a half grin, as though testing my reaction. As we settled into our seats, I noticed how focused he was, yet relaxed in a way that seemed to reflect the changes he had been making in his life. He explained his project with patience, occasionally pausing to ask for my opinion or to check if I understood. There was a rhythm to our conversation, a natural ebb and flow, that made it feel less like a parent watching over a child and more like two people engaged in meaningful dialogue. At one point, he leaned back in his chair, stretching, and looked at me thoughtfully. "You know, Mom," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about how much you've helped me without even realizing it. Just being here, listening, giving me space to figure things out. It's made a bigger difference than I can really put into words." I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I kept my voice calm. "I'm glad," I said softly, "but you've done the work too. Courage like yours doesn't happen without effort. I just happened to be here to witness it." He smiled, a little shyly this time, then returned to his notes. I watched him work, noting the subtle ways he had grown, his focus, his confidence, the quiet assurance in his gestures. There was a calmness about him now, a sense of clarity that I hadn't seen before. And yet, beneath that calmness, I could still detect traces of uncertainty, which reminded me that growth is never a straight line, that life's most meaningful lessons often come with moments of doubt. As the afternoon wore on, our conversation drifted away from research and into more personal territory. He shared stories of friends he had made, challenges he had faced, and small victories that had given him a sense of accomplishment. I listened, occasionally offering insight, mostly just providing a space for him to speak openly. There was something profoundly moving about watching him navigate his own path, realizing that the person I had raised was now creating a life that felt authentically his own. Then, after a pause, he looked at me with a seriousness that caught my attention. "Mom, I want to talk about something a little harder," he said, "something I've been holding back, even from myself." I nodded, encouraging him to continue, though my heart raced a little. I had learned to trust him, but I also knew that these moments of vulnerability could feel heavy. "It's about the choices I've made in the past," he said. "Some of them were mistakes, and some were just me figuring out who I am. But I want you to know I'm not hiding anymore. I'm trying to be honest with myself and with you about everything. I reached across the table and placed my hand lightly on his. You don't have to carry the weight alone, I said. We all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them, that we try to move forward with integrity. He looked down at our hands, then back up at me, a mixture of relief and gratitude in his expression. Thank you, he said simply. For a while, we sat in silence, letting the words settle, letting the quiet hum of the library wrap around us. There was no rush, no pressure, just the shared understanding that comes from trust and mutual respect. I realized in that moment that our relationship had grown deeper than I could have imagined. It wasn't just about parent and child anymore. It was about two people walking side by side, learning from each other, and supporting each other in ways that transcended age or authority. When we finally packed up our things and left the library, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the campus quad. Students milled about, some heading to their dorms, others lingering to talk with friends. I walked beside him, feeling a quiet joy in the simplicity of the moment. We didn't need grand gestures or dramatic declarations. The connection we shared was already profound, already shaping both of our lives. He paused near a fountain, watching the water ripple in the soft evening light. Mom, he said, after a long pause, I feel different. I feel like I'm finally starting to understand who I am, and it's because I've had someone to support me while I figure it out. I smiled, feeling a warmth that spread through my chest. That's all anyone can ever hope for, I said, to be seen, to be supported, and to find your own way. He nodded, then linked his arm through mine, and together we walked back toward the car, the campus bathed in the gentle glow of the setting sun. The world felt softer, slower, and yet somehow fuller. In the quiet rhythm of our steps, in the shared silences and gentle conversations, I understood something essential, that the most profound lessons of life are often found not in grand events, but in the steady, patient unfolding of love, trust, and understanding. That evening, as I reflected on the day, I realized that our relationship had transformed in a way I hadn't anticipated. There was a new depth to our bond, a subtle but powerful sense of partnership in the journey of life. And I knew that the path ahead, with all its challenges and discoveries, would be richer for both of us because we were walking it together. In the days that followed, I noticed a change not just in him, but in myself. Life felt quieter, somehow more intentional. I began noticing small things, the way he paused before speaking, the way he laughed a little more freely, the gentle confidence in his gestures. And I realized that his honesty, his courage, had given me permission to slow down, to listen more carefully, to appreciate the subtle beauty of our connection. One morning, he called me out of the blue. Mom, he said, voice bright yet calm, want to walk with me through campus? I want to show you something. Curiosity sparked, I agreed, and soon we were strolling down familiar paths, the air crisp and alive with the scent of autumn. There was a calm rhythm to our steps, a sense of ease that had not existed before. We passed students hurrying to classes, professors waving to colleagues, and the familiar buildings bathed in sunlight. Everything felt alive, yet intimate, as if the world had contracted to the two of us. He led me to a small garden tucked between two of the older buildings. It wasn't anything grand, just a quiet courtyard with benches, flowering plants, and a fountain gently trickling in the background, but it had an almost magical quality in its simplicity. This is where I come when I need to think, he said. I sat on a bench, watching him as he paced slowly among the flowers, running a hand through the petals of a rose as though testing their texture against his fingers. There was a thoughtful serenity in his movement, a kind of presence that spoke volumes about how much he had grown. I wanted to show you this because, he began, turning to face me, I want you to know that the way I live my life now, it's with intention. I've been learning to trust myself, to be honest with my choices, and to accept that I don't have to have everything figured out at once. And I wanted you to know that none of it would have been possible without your support." I felt my chest tighten, a familiar warmth swelling. "You've always had it in you," I said softly. "I just needed to be here while you discovered it for yourself." He smiled, the kind of smile that carries gratitude, relief, and quiet pride all at once. "And that's why I wanted to share this moment with you," he said. "Because this is the place where I started to understand that I could be honest, not just with myself, but with the people I care about, especially with you." I nodded, feeling the weight of the moment sink in. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It wasn't a turning point marked by fireworks or applause. It was quieter, softer, more enduring. It was the kind of moment that changes you not by spectacle, but by subtle, persistent resonance. We sat together for a while, watching the fountain ripple in the afternoon sun, listening to the soft rustle of leaves. We didn't need to fill the space with words. The connection between us was enough. I could feel it in the way he relaxed beside me, in the calm steadiness of his gaze, in the simple trust that had grown over weeks of conversations, shared reflections, and quiet understanding. At one point he spoke again. "Mom, do you think we ever stop growing? Or is it more like learning to notice the ways we've changed?" I thought about that, looking at the sunlight bouncing off the fountain, at the gentle sway of branches in the breeze. "I think it's both," I said. "We grow, we change, and sometimes we don't even notice it until we pause and reflect. And the people who walk with us, who listen, who trust, who love us, help us see those changes clearly." He nodded slowly, as though committing my words to memory. There was a quiet understanding between us now, a mutual recognition that life is made up of these small yet profound moments. Moments where honesty, courage, and love intersect, leaving lasting impressions on the heart. As the sun began to dip below the rooftops, casting long shadows across the courtyard, I realized how much this journey, his journey, our journey, had transformed me. I had learned to step back and listen, to offer support without judgment, and to celebrate the subtle victories that life offers in quiet, unassuming ways. We left the garden hand in hand, walking slowly back toward the main campus, each step deliberate and meaningful. The air was crisp, filled with the faint scent of fallen leaves and the soft hum of distant activity. And in that rhythm, I felt a profound sense of peace. I understood then that life's most meaningful connections aren't always forged in grand declarations or dramatic moments. They are built in small, intentional acts of trust and understanding, in shared silences, in moments of vulnerability met with patience and respect. And as I looked at him walking beside me, tall, confident, yet still my son in ways that words could never fully capture, I felt a deep gratitude for the journey we had shared. We reached the edge of campus just as the last light of day painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. He paused, turning to smile at me once more. "Thanks for being here," he said simply. "And thank you for letting me in," I replied, my voice quiet but filled with warmth. We walked on together, the horizon stretching before us, and I knew that whatever came next, challenges, discoveries, joys, or quiet reflections, we would face it with honesty, mutual respect, and the kind of love that only grows stronger through understanding. The world felt brighter, softer, more hopeful. And in that shared quiet, I realized that we had both been changed for the better. Our journey wasn't over, of course. Life never really ends its lessons. But in that moment, in that golden light, I felt a deep, enduring sense of connection. And for the first time in a long while, I felt certain that the foundation we had built, through trust, honesty, and courage, would carry us forward together, no matter what the future held.